This is Upasna, and welcome to this week's or this month's Likhawat, which is our authors panel. We have three incredible authors here, and I am so happy to meet with them. We have three of my super favorites. I've recently read their work, so let me go one by one. I'll look at who's on my screen, so it'll be in that order, I guess. So on my leftmost side is Rukhsanna Guidroz. Hopefully, I'm reading your name right, Rukhsanna. She is just an incredible writer. I discovered her work with two things that I'm going to call out. One is her incredible picture book, children's book, which is Meena versus the Monsoon. It has great illustrations from Devasmita Dasgupta, who's also been on this panel, and a fantastic story of a little girl doing soccer. The next one that really spoke to my heart was this book called Samira Surfs, which is set in Bangladesh and talks about the Rohingya Muslim community. The whole book is written in verse. It has great illustrations and it's really powerful storytelling. It talks about this community which you typically might forget because there is some newspaper mention somewhere and then no one talks about them. So just getting that story out is incredible. I loved it. And if you guys are looking for a new book, I highly recommend. The next one I have here on my screen is Tasneem Dairywala. She was recently in Toronto and just moved. And she wrote a picture book recently, and it is incredible. Don't worry, like if you need to know all the names, we are going to have all of their work highlighted when we post this out. And this is a little fairy who's losing her glow and how she gets it back. And as a parent of a toddler, I can tell you it's visually appealing. It's a great story. It's something you can read out to your kids. Really, really interesting. And I know that Tasneem is working on the next part of that book as well. The next person I have here on my screen is S.J. Sindu. I'm going to call her Sindu. That's what I know I can. And I am doing, like most readers who love books, I am doing two of her books at the same time right now. So I am reading her recently released book, which is juvenile young fiction. It's called Shakti, which is a graphic novel. And it has powerful visuals, really, really good stories. And it will hold your attention, like it sort of demands to be read. And the next book I'm also hearing is A Marriage of 1,000 Lives, which is really strong. So it's like, when I'm driving, this is true story. I actually literally missed my exit because I was hearing the story and I was so involved and I'm like, oh, my exit is just gone. So I need to that's what happens with really great audiobooks and it's incredible. I will not go through their formal introductions. We will have that posted out so you guys can find them because, anyone who's interested in their work will be able to find this on their websites and be able to get their work. And most of this work is available in libraries, on Amazon, on bookshop.org, whichever formats you prefer. So welcome, guys. Just from a logistical reason, we will try and close this within the 30 minutes. I know that usually we keep an hour, but that's just if we have any questions in the end, which we would like to take. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time and want to highlight Rukhsanna is in Hawaii. So she's at 5:30 her time and I cannot appreciate her enough because it's so early and I appreciate you. So let me get started. I think, the topic you guys know, we are talking about diversity and we have writers who've written for middle grade fiction. We have writers who've written for children and they are always thinking about these different themes. And so I'm going to probably start with you, Rukhsanna. That your books talk about communities which are often like stereotyped, that this is what they do, this is what people expect, and you somehow break that mold. In both the books that at least I've read, it kind of questions that who should play soccer, who should surf, and it's talking about communities which are usually in minorities. So as you do your books, and I'm sure you're meeting readers, have you had a story where you're like, this really had powerful impact, or you've seen the positive impact of telling stories which are not often told in the way you do?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on this panel. It's great to be with you all. I think that, there's a lot of media talk right now about exposing different stories and people from different ethnicities and backgrounds and faiths, and I think it's really important to expose as much specific detail as possible because we are all so different in our tastes and our backgrounds, our beliefs within even a certain a country and a group of people, and within your own family. We're all very different, and we form our own opinions as we grow older, and some of them go back and come back from the roots of our upbringing. And I think as a reader, you get the opportunity to question that when you are reading about a different ethnic group, or a different setting or different culture. You get the opportunity to compare and contrast as you're reading, and it may not be in the forefront of your mind, but I think you get that opportunity to just think, when I grew up, I didn't used to do that, or when I grew up, I did a similar thing, but we did it this way. So there's always the opportunity, I think, to if you're a reader that has awareness and is interested in and curious about the world, to have that conversation in your mind, and then it's a great opportunity to talk to your family over dinner. Whatever has come up in your reading or in your day, to discuss those themes and those beliefs, and to really dig deeper. There's this moment, this opportunity when you have a curious mind, I think, to question and to look at and to really appreciate someone else's culture. So that comes up often with the books that I've read and books I've written, and specifically Samira Surf's and Layla and Saffron and Mina versus the Monsoon. I think I've had readers who have come up to me and said, I didn't know about Rohingya, this ethnic group who come from Myanmar or Burma and now mostly live in Bangladesh. So they've asked me about them and how I got to learn about them. So for me, it's an opportunity to share what I learned on my journey of writing that book, for example.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's like I somehow personally, as a reader, I'll tell you, that spoke to me also because I belong to Kashmir. I was born there. It's a region which has seen a lot of conflict. And so, I mean, I've seen political commentary on my region as well. But then, you don't get to the human side of that conflict. And I think that is what I see described so well, because often people don't know. And, Sindhu, you've done work you've written so many diverse characters yourself and so many diverse themes, and whether or not they are regional, but I've seen there's gender called out. There's also obviously specific communities called out. How do you how do you put yourself in it? What are the kind of impact moments that you felt when you've written that work? And what have you heard from readers as well? Similar, even though your work is so different than what Rukhsanna has done.
Well, it's always been, I didn't start out, trying to represent different communities. I really started out with my first book, Marriage of a Thousand Lies, just really trying to tell the story of that I've experienced and that many of the South Asian queer people that I love have experienced. And then it just sort of grew from there, because you can't populate a story with, people who look exactly like you and who are exactly from the backgrounds that you're from. And so I've always been really interested in social justice. I was a community organizer for a while. And so writing was also a way to reach people. If writing could, especially fiction stories, could engender empathy in people, then I wanted to create nuance, because South Asian literature is kind of dominated by especially North Indian and Pakistani stories, and the rest of us kind of get shuffled out, and so I wanted to bring diversity into the South Asian perspective. And so and then also talk about gender and sexuality. I've been really, in the last few years that I've been writing, really trying to think about my own privileges and the things that I really care about to discuss in my work. for example, thinking about Hinduism and thinking about fundamentalist religions, and what is my role in all of this as a non-Indian but somebody who was raised Hindu in the US, thinking about caste and what kind of caste privileges I might have had, and how caste functions differently in Sri Lanka versus India. So like I've been thinking about all of that, and I've been trying to kind of navigate it through writing about it. But it's also meant having a lot of accuracy readers and sensitivity readers, and making sure to hire people from those particular backgrounds to read my work. And that's been invaluable. I in my second novel, Blue Skinned Gods, I have a Dalit character, I have a trans girl character. And for both of those, I was like, I have to have, sensitivity readers. I have to have somebody checking my work. And I found two amazing people who helped me. And that's like, that to me is a really important part of writing this kind of collaboration with the communities that I'm trying to write about.
I love that. And this is like your work is I've like done this. It's a personal reading goal for me, that I'm going to only read books in and about the South Asian diaspora, or just South Asia in general. So in this year, I first read V.V. Ganeshanathan's book, which is like an adult book, but it's called A Brotherless Night. Talks about the Sri Lankan conflict. It's attractive to me just because I've seen it myself as a child. And so to read that and have this experience is very interesting, because, like you're saying, a lot of people, especially out West, tend to put the entire, like, I guess the brown stories are all a monolith for them. They don't somehow realize that, there's not just one single brown stories. We have such a diverse group of people. We are talking about 1 billion plus people. They cannot all have the same stories. And so thinking about those intersectionalities or specific communities is something what really empowers me as a reader. And I'll say this, like when you were saying North Indian, I'm like, we're as an organization doing a literary fest, which is happening in Dehradun, which is very much north of India. But it's so hard to find authors who've talked about the Western Himalayan region that we are focusing on, like Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand. Like these are the 3 regions we are talking about. And a lot of the times we find authors who've written about political conflict in these areas, but they are not from the places, and they talk about it from a distance, almost outside in, instead of being a part of that community that can actually talk about lived experiences or has research like you were describing. So, which is very critical, because, when people write, I think if they can't involve the community directly, it's kind of like it has that element of being too outside in, and you might not get true experiences, I guess. And, this brings me to Tasneem, because, she and I were chatting that she writes to a younger audience compared to the two of you guys. But to me, what I found most attractive, Tasneem, about your work was because our work doesn't always need to talk about like our diversity, because we also have regular lives. Like we are parents and we have toddlers, and we are raising them in, on our day-to-day basis will include unicorns and fairies. And that is one way to explain our experiences without even having to call out that this is the community, because we also have human experiences which are similar. So tell me what was going in your head as a parent when you were, writing this book, and what brought you there? Like, because the parenting experiences we have are, just common, but also have differences because of the way, because of our community, because of where we grow. So speak to us a little about it.
So actually, before it turned into a story for children, I was writing a diary entry, which was basically my mom talking to my daughter, who at the time was 3 years old, about some of my experiences with mental health. And really just kind of seeing myself in the future talking to my daughter once she's an adult about my experiences with mental health, and then also just her understanding that everyone experiences the world differently, and that emotions can be complex. You can feel sad, you can feel happy at the same time, you can feel broken, and you can also feel healed. So just thinking about all of those things, it was a very long diary entry. And then I was like, how do I turn this into something that a child could understand? She is not an adult yet, she's 3 years old. And so then I was thinking about, turning it into fantasy characters, and fairies are something that are very popular. And instead of talking about, like having bipolar disorder or going through depression, the book ended up being about a fairy breaking her wings, a fairy being afraid of shadows. So just using metaphors to convey just kind of complex topics that are really like for adults to understand, but that children can still grasp. Yeah, so that's really what I wanted to do. I think it's important to write stories that we know that come from within, and then of course to do your research and try to connect with other people as well. But for me, it's like when I write, it's about my own core experiences, and then the research, and then the editing, all of that comes from outside. So yeah, this story was about struggling with mental health and continuing to live anyway.
Yeah, no, and that itself, I remember when we first talked and you were describing this, I was like, mental health is a big taboo in the community, at least that I'm from, and especially for moms, because it's somehow expected that you will deal with it, or that it's normal. I can't tell you how many people have told me, like, I had baby blues, as we technically call them, in the first week after my child was born, and everyone sort of was insisting that it's normal, you will feel okay, but you don't feel okay, or you might feel both emotions at the same time, like it's incredible, but you're also feeling sad. And to me, all three of you have written work which has that nuance, right? Like sometimes the character is feeling that they've achieved something. Like I'm thinking Samira serves, and she's like going through this incredibly hard journey of being a migrant in a country that is not accepting, but she's also surfing, which is giving her this high as it would to any 11-year-old who's trying something new. And I found that incredible to hold space for both of those emotions. I'm curious to learn from all of you guys, and I'll go one by one. And, when you're writing it, of course, you go through your writing process, but are you thinking about the impact it's having on the reader in terms of, like, are you intentionally trying to think that, will you write in a way that would make people empathetic about something they might not know about? Like, how do you put that at the back of your writer's mind when you're telling a story? And Rukhsanna, I'm going to start with you, because it has the story which has like really harsh moments, but also like just the brilliance of an 11-year-old who thinks everything is possible. Like, what are you thinking when you are telling that story?
That's an interesting question. Samira Surfs was in many ways a hard story for me to write. There are so many elements that I wanted to show her vulnerability, but I also wanted to show, this is my main character, Samira, I also wanted to show the brave side of her, the side that wants to know more about the world around her, the side that is mixed up, because most 11-year-olds I know have a whole array of emotions, maybe even in 1 minute. They are working out their world around them. They are questioning their beliefs, their family's beliefs, the norms in society, expectations, demands on themselves from the community. They're working all of that out. And really, when I am not intentionally setting a mood or a theme, I'm just so deep in it. I was Samira. And I've been through the journey of learning to surf, so that was really easy for me. I had to do a lot of work for the refugee aspect of the story, but and that is probably a whole nother talk. But it really for me was about immersing myself, putting myself in her shoes, and seeing the world through her lens. And once I did that, I knew that she had questions and she had fears, and she would maybe want to overcome something and would still try, for example, to surf, knowing that it was taboo for her to do that. So I just put myself in her shoes and went from that place. And I think once you start to see the world from someone else's perspective, you begin to develop this ability to maybe imagine how they would feel or react, or the whole the mixed up emotions that you would have vis-a-vis girls, for example, who are not accepting you. Well, I think many of us can relate to a certain time in middle school when we were not accepted, or we were shunned, or we felt uncomfortable. So it's really exploring those boundaries and following. It was almost, it got to a point where I was just following the story. It was almost writing itself, but I had to just surrender to it. And a lot of it was not intentional. A lot of it was just, okay, I'm going to go with the flow in this moment and see where it takes me.
I love that, surrendering to the story. I'm going to like high quote it, air quote it, because, it's, as someone who teaches tools and frameworks, I'll tell you that, there's both sides. Like it almost feels like using the left brain and the right brain, because both things are important. Like there is obviously a creative process that you use, but you guys have been writing probably for a while. So it's like maybe what is very intuitive to you, someone has to learn when they just start. And, but at the same time, I often see when I'm writing on my own, it's hard in the beginning, but then at a point when you're really in the story, you really are, the story is making you move, which I can relate to. And Sindhu, I'm going to come to you. Do you feel a similar sense? Like, is that your process? How do you sort of inhabit the story?
I think, yeah, surrendering or inhabiting are great words. Really, I tend to do, when I first started to write, I didn't do a lot of planning beforehand. I was just sort of like, I would just start writing. I would have a character maybe, or even a phrase in mind, and I would just start writing. Nowadays, I do a lot more planning, a lot more pre-writing work, I guess. And not all of that is outlining or anything like that. It's more like trying to get to know the characters. So I actually know them really well before I start writing, without having to write 3 or 4 or 5 drafts. Because that used to be what I did, is that I would just draft and draft and draft until I knew the characters. And, it's still somewhat similar, but I do a lot of like, what is the shape of the story kind of work beforehand. And I find that doing that beforehand is actually a great way to surrender more to the story, because I can give over and just fully inhabit the characters. And I know that if I follow the shape that I've sort of made for myself, that it would still work, that I'm not going to get lost somewhere. I still like to have a sense of discovery while I'm writing the story. I think that's really important to me. The part of the joy of writing is that sense of discovery. And I don't have huge discoveries anymore with the kind of planning I do, as in like, I'm not going to get to page 200 and find out and like realize that this character had a traumatic past. I already know that going in, but I get to discover how a scene is going to play out. I get to discover what exactly a character is about to say. And I think like what has been really important for me as a writer who started out writing for adults, and especially literary fiction, moving over to the kid lit space, was to really like take a hard look at myself and say that I'm not gonna like I'm not gonna simplify emotions. I'm not going to simplify the stories very much, as in I want complexity and nuance to still come through, even in children's literature. And obviously, depending on the age range, you can do different types of complexity. But even for middle grade audiences, I don't want to simplify feelings, because middle grade audiences do feel the full range of feelings, and often a lot more than adults can feel, because we've trained ourselves not to feel extremes sometimes. Like, 11-year-olds can feel depressed or sad or angry. They're going through experiences like bullying, like Rukhsanna said, and all of that has to be sort of there for me in the story. And the next graphic novel that's coming out is actually about the 2004 tsunami, and it's set in Sri Lanka, and it's for a YA audience. But I had to, really make a decision. Like, the tsunami is going to happen on the page. We are going to be there. There's going to be danger. We're going to deal with, loss and grief and, death. And it's not something to shy away from just because it's for a YA audience, and that's important to me as I write as well.
I appreciate it, because I feel like, as a person who reads YA novels and like children's books even before I had a child, because I just find that format highly engaging, and I love the idea that you were just describing earlier, Tasneem, as well, that how do you make these complex topics more approachable to the audience in an age-appropriate way, but don't shy away from them, because those are real emotions that children feel. And as a 13-year-old, I was definitely in like this heady space of feeling a lot. I don't think I gave my parents an easy time, because I had such extreme reactions, or I had strong reactions about things that were happening around me. So I think it's quite real. And you're right, as an adult, I probably have a more like a calmer, although like I feel like I love to feel, but I know that there are times where I will calm myself down before responding. And at the middle school level, I guess I don't think I was trained to do that. And so you feel a lot more spectacularly, I guess. So I love having, different things that you've described without shying away from them. And, Tasneem, I'm going to come to you, because I know that you're probably drafting the next version of your book. So what's going in your head? Like, what is your process as you start putting the story together?
I usually start I have not as experienced as the other authors that Sindu said. I usually start with brainstorming. I usually have a word or a phrase or something in my mind, and, I'll just brainstorm, speed write. And for my work, I don't feel as much of a need to have an outline, just because the stories are so much shorter. My last book was 500 words. This book is 800 words. So I prefer to just write a 10-page story, which I know is not appropriate for a picture book, and then to find, parts of it, like the good parts of it, and then use those to do an outline, and then basically rewrite the thing, and then write a million drafts after that. But yeah, that's my process. And for the next book, I wanted it to be a sequel to the book that I've already written. I'm just going to show it quickly. This is The Little Fairy Finds Her Glow. So I knew I wanted it to be a sequel. I knew I wanted some of the themes to carry over. So in the new book, instead of a fairy, it's a little elf, and that book is more about inner beauty. And the elf, it's a vain little elf, and he falls into an enchanted pond, and his nose turns purple, and now he has to just deal with this purple nose. But it is also about coping with complex emotions, like emotions, moods. Those are a huge thing for me to explore. And as you guys said, with 11-year-olds, wow. Then you have the toddlers, right? They experience like 2,000 emotions in like 5 seconds. So that's also why I feel like picture books and at middle grade, as they get older too, they can be such useful tools as they learn how to cope with their emotions. So yeah, that's my process: brainstorming, speed writing, and then for me, the outlining comes afterwards. Yeah,
I love that. I'm going to jump in and say, as a mom of a toddler, recently, I have what we call a Kashmiri nose, like it's quite big. I'm very happy with it. But my son has started telling me, because he's reading so many beautiful picture books by some of you guys, and he says, "Mama, your nose is like the mountain on Mars," because it's the largest mountain in the solar system. So he now tells me that, and like he's associating these things, right? And I love it, because I'm like, okay, I'm like raising someone who's able to make these associations, even though he's like 3 years old. So I know that children start absorbing what they are seeing around themselves. And whatever they're reading or engaging with, it definitely has an impact. So, that makes me even more passionate about making sure we have the nuance in writing. And, Tasneem, you sort of like did a fast forward. You already told us about your next book. So I'm going to go to Rukhsanna and say, tell us what's coming up. What should we expect as readers? Tell us what is coming from your desk next.
So I have a number of projects on the go right now. So I have a middle grade novel in verse again, about a girl who has mixed cultures and how she navigates that at school. And then I have, these are all just manuscripts at this stage. I have 2 non-fiction picture books that I've written, and also a picture book again about food. So I have several on the go.
That's amazing. That sounds really cool, especially the one about food, because recently I was talking with someone, I think it was Nima Vashia, who talked about a book about food and says, how food is an accessible way to understand a culture. We have such diversity in food as a diaspora as well. So I find it very fascinating when we write about that directly. And Sindu, tell us what's coming up. I know you have several books that we should be expecting.
Yes, so next year is my second graphic novel about the tsunami. It's called Tall Water. I think it's slated for summer of 2024. And then in this fall, I have an adult literary short story collection called The Goth House Experiment that's coming out in October.
That's really cool. So, I know that we have a little bit of an audience, and this will go out hopefully Monday or Tuesday. So I want to actually do a call out for all these authors. If you haven't read their work, before we wrap, I'm going to list my favorites that I like from them. Of course, their work is extensive and you should look up their websites. But for Sindu, I would highly recommend reading Shakti. If you guys haven't read it, it's a graphic novel, for younger kids, but also just for everyone. It's incredible, highly visual and very powerful storytelling. So recommend that. For Rukhsanna, I will recommend my favorite. As someone who was in middle school going through those emotions, as someone who had been internally displaced, I could relate to everything that Samira Surf's sort of brings. I would highly recommend reading that story. It just is such a powerful way to tell what communities who are displaced, they experience in real life. There's so much happening there. It's an incredible book. Please read. And for Tasneem, The Little Fairy Lost Her Glow. If you have small kids, especially, this is a great read along. It's a great book to read before bedtime, which I'm always looking for personally. So, these are all the books these incredible writers have written. And I would recommend you guys find them in your libraries or wherever you find books. And that actually brings us to the end of it. We are going to launch and share the video with everyone who had registered. It should come to you guys early next week. And before I close, the only thing I would say is that I didn't do a big introduction today. So just a quick snapshot of who we are, why we do this in 5 seconds is that I lead an organization called Peerbagh. We do workshops for kids and adults about creative confidence, and we are highly inspired by South Asian storytelling. And, one of our missions as a nonprofit is to showcase you work from South Asian writers or from the South Asian diaspora, books that talk about us or books that are written by people who look like us, sound like us. When kids and adults see this, they are encouraged and they know that their story matters and they can write as well. And so that, we create a world where there is tons of different kinds of diverse stories and we can see ourselves represented. Because, as a reminder, 70% of young adult and children's books here, at least in the West, are have lead characters that are white or animals. And we got to do something to change that because, we represent more than 54% of the world. So there's a lot that can happen. This is a good moment because I see a lot of momentum in the space, but my hope is that we can continue to do this with incredible authors that you see here and so many more that are writing and creating wonderful work. So appreciate all of you guys coming here and spending time with us, and we will stay connected. And for everyone who registered, they would have a video out to them soon. Thanks so much, guys.